I claimed I was innocent, but I've been secretly sneaking out to see my ex in a hidden location, and saying it straight like that makes my throat go dry and my palms sticky. And no, I'm not going to clean it up with euphemisms because those are just throw pillows you toss on a mess. I'm Lila, I'm 33, and I'm a city traffic analyst, the person who sits in a windowless room full of monitors and turns rush hours into heat maps. Who knows the speed of your commute the way a barista knows your order? Who can tell you which intersection is going to cough up gridlock before it even clears its throat? And somehow the same skill set that helps me predict congestion let me design the most efficient route to ruin my life without tripping an alarm at home. My husband is Aaron. He's a high school chemistry teacher with forearms that have permanent dry erase marker ghosts and a way of explaining electrons that makes even the sleepy kids sit up for a second. He keeps goggles hanging from a hook by the back door because he thinks safety should be a habit and not a performance. He reads the instructions on new appliances and saves the manuals in a labeled folder like there might be a pop quiz someday. He's calm in a way that doesn't make you feel small. When I forget where I left my keys, he says, "Let's retrace," and we do, and the keys appear under a damp dish towel because apparently that's who I am, a person who can model the city's circulation but not her own. The ex is Noah. We met at the old planetarium when we were 25, back when it was open on Thursday nights for community stargazing and the dome smelled faintly of dust and donated jackets. He ran the lights, which is such a small and dramatic way to describe a man who could make the Milky Way spill like a secret across a ceiling no one had thought about since 6th grade. He had hands that knew dimmers and burnt-out bulbs and exactly how long to hold a silence between constellations. We lasted 2 years, which is to say we loved each other through 2 winters and 1 summer where the whole city felt sticky and tender and nothing we touched wanted to be put back. We ended because he got a job on an observatory project in Chile, and I had just gotten the kind of promotion that comes with more responsibility and fewer windows, and we both told ourselves we were mature enough to call distance a fact instead of an insult. The hidden location is the planetarium. It closed during the pandemic and never reopened. Budget cuts, mold in the lobby carpet, and HVAC system that wheezed whenever the weather flirted with extremes. A nonprofit owns it now and says it's in transition, which is what buildings say when they're waiting for someone to love them hard enough to justify a grant. Noah came back to the city a year ago, older around the eyes in a way that looked like knowledge rather than regret, and he volunteered with the nonprofit on weekends, cataloging the old projection equipment, trying to coax the dome back into whispering stars. He texted me a photo of the lobby clock frozen at 9:17 and wrote, "Still keeping the wrong time. Some things are loyal to their errors." I wrote back, "How's the dome?" He said, "Shy. But she remembers." I hadn't thought about the planetarium in years, and then all at once it was under my skin again, the way places do when they once watched you fall in love. He told me he had a key. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't fully sanctioned. It was in that gray category urban planners mark with a dashed line. "Come see the test run," he said. No audience, no speeches. Just light. I told myself I was visiting a building, not a person. It's a sentence that sounds plausible if you say it while folding dish towels. Sneaking is just logistics wearing a hoodie. My nights off are Tuesdays and every other Thursday. Aaron has a long-standing pub trivia team on Tuesdays, the Noble Gases because of course, and they take the season embarrassingly seriously. I built my schedule around his schedule around the city's schedule. I said late shift after dinner, kissed the top of his head and took the green line to the end, then walked 4 blocks past a shuttered diner, past a dentist's office with a flickering sign that makes the tooth look like it's winking at your conscience, to a side door with peeling paint and a keypad so old it remembered the feel of my hesitation. He opened it from inside, and for a second the corridor light threw his shadow against me like a question. The dome still smells like school field trips and old popcorn. The seats are those low-slung planetarium chairs that force you into honesty. You can't sit upright and pretend you might bolt. He had everything set up, console lit, laptop humming, a bundle of fiber optics like a sleeping jellyfish. "Ready?" he asked, except he wasn't just asking about the projector. I nodded because my mouth did not trust me. When the dome woke, I felt my chest do that soft collapse it reserves for inevitabilities. The fake night above us bloomed into believable night, and I was simultaneously a grown woman who pays property taxes and a kid who used to lie awake naming shapes in the plaster of her ceiling because sleep was a story other people knew by heart. The stars crawled into position. The sound system breathed and then whispered the narration he'd written for the grant committee, except he didn't hit play and let the recorded voice do the work, he said it himself. If you tilt your head, he said, you can feel yourself falling through the light we left behind. I laughed because what else do you do when someone uses your favorite trick, tilting, as a door? We didn't kiss the first night. I need to tell you that because it matters to me that it wasn't a sprint. I sat in the third row, seat J8, the one I had claimed when we were us, and he sat 2 seats away and 1 row back like a person being careful with a museum piece. We watched Orion stretched wrong because the dome makes everything wrong and right at once. He pointed out anomalies like a magician confessing. There, he said. We never fixed that pixel halo around Betelgeuse. The projector insists. I said good. Perfection is impolite. He laughed quietly and turned down the whole night by 1 notch so we could see the edges of each other. And then I went home and I crawled into bed beside a man who smells like chalk and soap, and I lay awake in the normal dark, and I understood I had not been asked to be the protagonist in my life for a long time. That's not Aaron's fault. That's a job I forgot to apply for. It got easier and worse. Easier because the route lived in my bones now, platform, staircase, corridor, door. Worse because the longer I did it, the more efficient I became at hurting someone I love. I told myself things like, it's only light, as if light hasn't burned every planet it could reach. We started talking during the shows, which were not shows because we were the only audience, which made them the precise opposite, rehearsals for a story that might never happen. He told me about the mountain, how its weather learned his name, how the scientists he worked with were tireless and tiny under a sky that didn't care. I told him about the city, how the late-night traffic behaves like a moody river, how you can predict accidents by reading fatigue patterns on a screen. We said each other's names in the dark and tried not to make it rhyme with anyone's pain. The first kiss happened on a Tuesday when the fire alarm blipped in the lobby for no good reason, and my heart decided it was rehearsal for consequences. He went to check the panel and I went to stand in the doorway because thresholds make cowards brave and who knows why. He came back with the all clear and I made some joke about the building trying to tattletale, and he took 1 step forward into the joke and I took 1 step back to keep us in balance, and then there we were, forced into geometry, 2 lines finally intersecting. His mouth was unfamiliar in the way familiar things can be when you find them again after you've learned more letters. It was not grand. It was kind. And that is what makes the whole thing harder to carry, kindness killing even more politely than lust. I told no one. That's the point of secrets. Except, if we're being exact, I told the junk drawer. It became my confessional, stupid and holy at once. I'd put something in there when I came home from the planetarium, one of those free pens from the lobby with the museum's name, a folded program from a decade ago I found under a seat, a dead button battery because leaving something small and dangerous in the wrong place felt like honesty. Aaron would ask, have you seen the tape measure? And I'd say, top drawer to the left, and I could hear the 2 lives clink together for a second and not break. People always want to know if you were miserable in your marriage before you did something unforgivable, because that makes the math comforting. I wasn't. We had Thursday night omelets with too much cheese and a laptop balanced on a cookbook watching shows about people who moved to other countries sponsored by IKEA. We had arguments about whether you wash a cast iron pan with soap or prayer. We had the kind of sex that knows where the light switch is. The problem was not suffering. The problem was my life had become accurate. My job makes accuracy a virtue. My mouth uses it as a shield. Noah brought the laser pointer one night, yes, the cliché, and I did the lecture about how dangerous they are to pilots and retinas and trust, and he rolled his eyes and then did a little stand-up routine with it anyway, using his hand like a puppet that kept insisting it was a planet. I laughed too hard and then we were kissing again, and I thought, if laughter is a pre-existing condition, does that make what we're doing more or less my fault? No judge would accept that argument, by the way. I should know, I've tried to sell worse. The closest I got to being caught was not by Aaron. It was by a volunteer named Mary who came by on a Saturday with a thermos of coffee and a Tupperware of lemon squares and a key of her own and the gentlest kind of suspicion. I wasn't supposed to be there Saturdays. Saturdays were for errands and a rotation of friend brunches where none of us could hear anything because everybody's kid has learned how to gleefully shriek. I told Aaron I had to run to the office because the mayor's detail wanted a forecast for a street closure near a stadium concert. I told myself I would drop into the planetarium for 20 minutes and leave a note and a kiss and a promise, and then I would go back to the world where my choices didn't have a soundtrack. Mary saw my shoes first. Sensible city shoes, the kind you don't wear to a date with a mistake. She was in the lobby before I could bolt. Lila, she said, because once upon a time I had given a talk there about the city's night bus routes, and she had brought me a paper cup of water and told me I explained things like a person who could talk to children and adults and neither would feel scolded. Noah asked me to drop off, I started, and she waved her hand, polite as weather. We take care of what we love in secret sometimes, she said. I'm a widow. I keep my husband's coat in the closet like a climate. She put the lemon squares on the desk and left me alone with the smell of citrus and forgiveness, which is an unearned mercy if I've ever met one. It couldn't stay just night and jokes and mouth left open pauses forever. The nonprofit got a grant to do a small run of test shows, community nights, suggested donation, nothing fancy, and Noah asked if I would help coordinate the traffic flow because 100 people trying to leave a low-lit room at once is how you get a broken ankle and a headline. I can be invisible, I said. I'm good at it. He smiled in a way I chose to believe was sad and not proud. On opening night, I wore black and a lanyard and a pair of earpieces like a person in charge, and I walked the aisles with a small flashlight the way ushers have since they invented theaters, guardian angel with batteries. After the show, an older couple held hands in their seats and cried softly because seeing familiar stars made them remember somebody's name, and I stood a few feet away and tried not to shatter from the collision of guilt and awe. Aaron texted me a photo of a beaker with the caption satisfying, because he knows I like when liquids become other colors without warning. I sent back a heart and a lie, and I want to tell you I at least had the decency to feel the ache immediately, but sometimes remorse is delayed. It arrives when you're folding towels or at a red light or reading a sign someone posted on a telephone pole about a lost cat that looks just like every other cat and yet you believe this one is important. It arrived that night at 1:13 a.m. when I stood in my kitchen and finally saw the shape of the drawer I had built in my life that was labeled later. The conversation with Aaron started because I lost a potholder. That's the sort of sentence that should embarrass the gods. We were cooking, crowded in the way good kitchens are, and I went to pull the pan from the oven and said, "Where's the blue mitt?" And he said, "Maybe the junk drawer," and I opened it and it didn't just look messy, it looked like a themed collection. The pen, the battery, the folded map of the skyline from the planetarium gift shop, a screw from a seat that had not wanted to stay attached to its row. I put the drawer back in like the whole house might go out of square if I didn't. Aaron watches teenagers investigate acids and bases for a living. He knows what faces mean. He turned the heat off and leaned his hip against the counter. "Do you want to tell me," he asked, "why our drawer is now a time capsule?" I did not confess everything. I'm not a saint having a conversion on a kitchen tile. But I did not lie well either, because I've discovered when you finally open a door, the house wants air. I told him about the planetarium, about volunteering, about how light makes me feel like a person who got lost and found the lobby again. I told him I had seen Noah. He nodded because he already had his own rumor. He asked, "Are you leaving?" I said, "I don't know." It was the ugliest truth I could give. He looked at my face for a long time like it was a specimen under glass he could not name without breaking. Then he said the one sentence that both saved me and hurt me the most, "I want you to tell me before anything becomes gravity." We tried a truce. It looked like this: I would stop going to the planetarium alone. If we did anything there, we would do it together, as citizens, with a donation and a program and a seat in the middle of the row and his hand on my wrist squeezing twice when the show made him remember third grade. Noah did not push. He knows how to dim a room without turning it off. The nonprofit scheduled more shows. I sent out a sign-up sheet for volunteer ushers as if I were drafting a traffic plan for a parade. Life began to stand up straighter. But light is persistent and so am I. On a Sunday afternoon with rain that couldn't commit, I got a text from Noah. "Last test before they lock it down for renovations. 1 hour. I'll say please." I stared at the couch where Aaron had fallen asleep grading labs, at the cat who chooses whoever's lap is warmer, at my own hands which have lifted so many cups and folders and lies. I told myself any sentence I came up with would be cowardly. I woke Aaron gently and said, I want to go say goodbye to a building. He opened his eyes and looked at me the way people look at weather, measuring whether they will need a jacket. Do you want me to come? He asked. I said, I think I need to do it alone. He thought about that, not long and not short. Okay, he said. Then come back. It was not a grand hour. That almost makes me cry now. The dome blinked awake and did its trick, and the stars took their places. We didn't sit. We stood near the console side by side like two techs, pretending the show was work and not a choice. He spoke quietly about calibrations that wouldn't cooperate. I nodded like a person who could fix anything if you gave her enough data. When the hour ended, we didn't kiss. We put the cover on the projector like tucking in a child. We locked the side door. On the sidewalk, the rain had decided yes. He said, you are not my ending, and I said, you are not my alibi, and we hugged the way adults do when they remember standing in kitchens and saying stupid, brave things to kind men. Then I went home and I made tea and I handed it to my husband who had stayed. He didn't ask for a report. He put his hand on the back of my neck the way he does when he's saying I'm here without pretending he can fix anything. Maybe you want me to tell you I became good suddenly, that I deleted numbers and burned programs and planted a tree in contrition. That isn't true yet. I did delete the photos of my knees under the dome light. I did keep the pen because of course I did. I did tell the nonprofit I couldn't coordinate the spring series. I told them to ask Mary, she understands Mercy better than I do. I started going on Tuesday nights to trivia with Aaron and the noble gases and learned more than anyone should about noble in the chemical sense and the human one. I wish there were a cleaner sentence. There isn't. I'm trying to be a person who doesn't build hidden rooms inside honest ones. That looks boring most days, saying no to texts without applause, handing my phone to Aaron when I need to stop being interesting, letting him keep reading about electrolytes in bed while I stare at the ceiling that has no constellations and admit that quiet is not a punishment. It looks like taking him to the museum on a Sunday and standing in front of a sculpture we both don't understand and choosing to be confused together. It looks like riding the bus with him at dusk and not narrating the traffic pattern while I hold his arm and let him ask me what I'm afraid of when I say fine too fast. Sometimes I walk past the planetarium on purpose. During the day, it's a lump in the city's memory. At night, it's a dark dome that looks like an eyelid choosing when to blink. I put my palm on the cool stone by the entrance and I say thank you and I say I'm sorry and I say we're closed, and then I go home and open the junk drawer and clean it, actually clean it, the batteries in their case, the pens in a cup, the screw in a tiny Ziploc with a label that says seat 14 row D because accuracy is how I stay kind. I put the lemon square recipe Mary emailed me into the recipe box. I tell Aaron we should invite her over. We do. She sits at our table and eats and tells us about how wife like she's right in the next room, and when she leaves she squeezes my arm the way people do when they know you came back from a place you attempted to live in. I don't cry until I'm doing the dishes. If there's a moral, it's dish soap. When I think I'll never stop wanting the dome, I go to the freeway overpass near our apartment at 7:18 p.m. and watch the city make its own stars, headlights lining up like a constellation the ancients would have named after a patient animal. I lean on the railing and listen to the river of people who will never know me make its noise. I count the beats between green waves. I send a screenshot of the traffic to the group chat with my team and say, prediction was right, and 5 nerds reply with emojis that mean camaraderie and caffeine. I walk home. I unlock the door. I tell Aaron, you would have loved the way the lights synced by accident. He says, tell me everything, and I do, and the story is boring and true in hours, and for a minute that tastes better than any secret. And then I say, what was the best minute of your day? And he says, watching a kid finally believe balance is something you learn, not something you have, and we both agree to practice. We stack the bowls. We turn off the lights. We stand in the kitchen without a dome and try to be brave in the dark we actually live in.